Hey Adam, how you doing?
Good. You?
Good to see you. Well, listen, it's brilliant to be here in your company because we go back a long, long way. But of course, from this perspective, this is about the association and the partnership we're developing between the John Good Group and the WFA, which is fantastic. And I've got to say this first off. From our perspective, we're really, really grateful. What you did last season when you sponsored our prestigious Cup competition and agreeing to do that for the next 2 seasons is absolutely brilliant. So it's a thanks from me personally, but also from the entire community. From a WFA perspective, it really means an awful lot and helps us build the game. So thank you for that.
Absolute pleasure. It was something that was new to us when you first brought it to us. But as we started to understand what the game was about, how inclusive it was, and started to really understand the ambition that the team had in terms of what they wanted to try and do with the cup competition and the broader awareness of the sport, it just ticks so many boxes for me personally, but also the alignment between the values and the two organisations is just there.
Nice.
So it really did feel like one of those easy decisions to make. And it's not always like that, but this one was an easy one.
And we'll get into that because there's a few questions I think really right for us to ask you in terms of how did you get involved in it in the first place, but what's really appealed, but also things like values. So I've got a few questions that I prepared, Adam, but I'd love to ask you on that because I think the community would like to hear that.
Okay.
And just before we do that, one of the most important things for us from a chairperson's perspective and from a group of trustees is to pick people that have, to your comment a few moments ago, aligned values. And for us, that's a really important thing. It isn't just about commercially finding someone that we can benefit from and hopefully that benefits them as well in terms of bringing in a financial element to help us grow the game. It's about people who have that kind of value set. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a hugely important thing for us to push out there.
That was so evident the first time I came to the Sport Live, which was in Nottingham, and it was one of the league rounds. And you introduced me to a few people and then you left me to my own devices and I just had a bit of a wander. And the community that is the sport, the spectators, some of the players, some of the officials, were so welcoming and so friendly and wanted to be helpful and help me understand the sport better and the roles that they played within it. And I was sat there reflecting on that experience ahead of today, really. And I was like, you couldn't have been more welcoming. And if I wanted John Good to partner with an organisation, I couldn't have written down more than what I experienced on that first time live. So from the start, that alignment has just been there. And as I've got more into the sport and as we've developed last season and we're looking ahead to the next 2 seasons, I'm really excited actually about what we can achieve with the WFA Cup. I think there's just an awful lot of opportunity. And
we're going to specifically get into that because I think that would be useful for our community to hear some of that kind of message as well in terms of what it looks like for this season. But as we talked about that multi-season deal, that 2 seasons, we can start to touch on what it looks like and where you want it to be as well because you're a key player in that. And I have to say this, you've become a fan, haven't you, of the sport?
I have become a fan of the sport. Last year, so my first year in the sport, a huge learning experience actually. So you go from hearing from yourself, you then start to do some research, you go onto YouTube, you see some of the games, you hear the commentary, you start to have an understanding of the basic principles. And then there's a magic moment, I think, where you go from being interested but very new, and then all of a sudden it clicks. And you're watching how the players are moving and how they're moving on the court and how the way the ball's moving and the defence. You start to pick up on 2-on-1s and other bits and pieces. And all of a sudden you go from seeing, on the face of it, some guys, moving a ball around and trying to play their variation of football. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, this is the magic of the game now. And there is a very marked change where you go, I've got it. I understand it. I understand what they're trying to achieve and how they're trying to do it. And when the guys who are playing pull off the manoeuvres and some of the ways they move around the court and you see it, it's like poetry because the skills that you need to pull those things off and the timing that's there is incredibly special. And when you see that and then you start to understand it, then you start to fall in love with this game because it's different to football.
Yeah.
and then you see the magic of the sport, and then all of a sudden you're like, right, I'm a fan now. And now you're watching every game, and you're watching how different players move, and you watch some of the game management, and you watch how they do things and how they trap the ball and how they're trying to do different pieces, and then you're like, I'm in this now.
And they're elite athletes.
They are elite athletes.
So the reality is that the sport designed for people with the disabilities, but ultimately we're talking about elite athletes here that perform, as you've just rightly mentioned, Adam, perform things on the court which are just extraordinary. Did your appreciation increase? Because I know you've sat in a chair and given that a go. Did it increase after that?
100-fold, maybe more. You have an appreciation when you're on the sidelines and you can see what's happening. I don't think being on the sidelines does justice to two things. The speed of the chair.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're all moving at the same speed, because they're calibrated like that, that you don't appreciate just how quickly they're moving around. So that's definitely one thing. When you get in the chair, you feel the speed. You're like, okay, this is faster than you appreciate. And the second bit that you appreciate is the coordination and the timing and the way the ball's moving and how you need to move the chair itself. And all of a sudden you sit in a chair, you experience it, you experience the timing, you experience some of the G's you get when you're spinning round. The guys were trying to help us take penalties, which on the face of it you think, well, this should be straightforward enough. And we were about 20 minutes probably taking penalties, could not get anywhere near it. And that underlines the skill, the timing, the awareness. And then you try and combine the pace with the technique and the timing. And then the appreciation goes through the roof. It is genuinely elite. And it is not something that can be taken lightly. Those guys are incredibly skilled at what they do. And I think you do get appreciation watching, but I think it does take a step up in terms of when you actually have the chance to participate and understand the manoeuvrability and what the guys go through to play.
And I love one of the things you said earlier on as well, which you talked about the community. And it's lovely to hear that someone comes into it for the first time. And I'm not sure if that was done by design on my part. I probably went off to grab a coffee myself, but to leave you to your own devices so you can just sit there and watch and absorb. Credit to you, Adam, and some of your colleagues that we've had the fortune of meeting as well. You've got to throw yourself into it, right? And if you do that, the community are incredibly warm and welcoming, aren't they? So you can get close to the players, which I know you've done as well on several occasions, which is great. It's exactly how we want that to be. And it means an awful lot to the community as well. People that stand on the outside, that probably wouldn't be received in the same way. So the fact that you've come in and you have literally thrown yourself towards it, you're very engaged across socials, but when you're there physically, you're doing the same things, and following that as a value set as well, that's meaning an awful lot to our community. Yeah,
great. And as I say, they were just so welcoming. It's the standout for me in an early experience, and all it did was reinforce the fact that we made a good decision to get involved in the Cup, and that warm feeling was reinforced all of the right decisions. We'd made the good call doing what we decided to do.
Nice. Let's talk about hopes and expectations for the multi-season deal. So 2 seasons, prestigious Cup competition, final at St George's Park, which we'll come on to a little bit later because you were involved in that. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts and your impressions of that as a whole. But from an overall perspective, talk to me about your vision in terms of your support over the next 2 seasons, Adam.
So I think there's 2 things that set up that vision as I see it. We had a great first year experience, but I would also say a lot of us were finding our feet. You were relatively new in role, supported by an amazing team that have been through this in a few different ways. We came to it as a new sponsor into the sport. We were on that steep learning curve to try and understand the whats and the hows and how it all works and puts together. So I felt the first year was a really good grounding foundational year. We learned about you learned about us, we learned about what the partnership can do together for the sport. So I think that was one of the big areas of understanding and shapes my thinking moving forwards. And I think we were successful last year. I think the way we executed the brand was positive. I think the reaction from the players, from the officials and the fans was positive.
Very much so.
So I think we did a good job first year. So I think that was one of the things that's in my thinking when we start to think about ambition. The second bit is the WFA have released their strategic document about what the strategic vision is for the sport as a whole. And some of the real key areas that they want to grow and develop the sport. And I read that document. I spent some time really trying to understand what the sport wants to try and achieve and what our role is within that. And the brilliant news and the reason why we're so confident about the multi-year strategy or the multi-year agreement is the strategy. We buy right into it. We love what you're trying to achieve with the sport, and we are happy to play our role within that. So I think those two things have happened over the last 12 months that have given us great confidence that this is something that we want to do, and actually we feel that we can play a part in that.
Very much so.
We're not the key drivers by any means. There's loads of other sponsorships, which is amazing for the league structure. There's the work that you're doing broader and with the FA. It's all brilliant work, but we can play our little role with the cup competition, and it's a prestigious event, so that works really, really nicely for us.
Not a little role. Significant role.
Okay, significant role. Thank you very much. But we'll play our part,
yeah.
is the key message, I suppose. So let's look ahead for the next 2 years. So we've managed to secure Derby again, which I felt last year was a great venue to try and take the cup towards. Bigger event, multi-pitch, multi-court. We can make all that stuff work. That was really exciting for me about Derby, and to be able to do that again, I think is reinforcing the direction that we want to travel in. I think my ambition for the cup this year is to start to create more awareness. That's what I'd really like to see. If I could have one thing this year, it's to raise the awareness of the cup competition that is happening and bring more spectators to the sport. That's what I'd really like to achieve this year. And I think there's a number of ways we can do that. I think we can encourage the clubs to bring more spectators. I think we can really engage the local community in the Derbyshire area to bring more spectators. And I think we can go into some of the influencer areas to try and to find people that might want to be connected to the sport and make sure they're bringing some eyeballs, whether that be on the day in person or through some of our social media channels, into the sport and into the beauty of the cup, right? Knockout competition, it's all on the line, you get it done on a day. So if I had to have one thing about the 24-25 season, it would be more eyeballs. So that would be the big ambition. I think there's a secondary ambition from a group perspective about how much further we can build the brand, execute some of that brand awareness in relation to that. I think we did a good job this year through some of our socials, but I think we can probably take a step forward as well. So that's a little mini incentive, I think, or mini objective for the business. And then the last one, and I think it does link to the participation sort of attendance point, is trying to get more people into the chairs. I think that's really quite important because that's where you go from that. I now understand what the players are going through. And so if I talk about 24-25, we've got to get more people there. And if I can help build the John Good brand a bit more, that'll be a win for us. And if I can help get some more people into the chairs to experience the sport firsthand, I think that's a really nice stepping stone from where we've been to where I'd like to go next year. And the reason why I think 24-25 needs to be about more attendance and getting more people into the sport, I'd really like to go another step the year after that and really make this whole road to Derby concept really come alive for the sport. You know, the FA Cup, has the Wembley. I'd really like to get the feeling into the sport for the fans, for the players, where Derby is the crowning cup moment. And I think we've got all the opportunity to do that. I think the willingness is there to do that. And I think we need to trial and test some things this year to do that. But if we can bring that participation and fans in this year, that allows us to build on that next year. And if I took anything from the amazing experience at St. George's, that the noise and the atmosphere in that final was by far the best that I experienced that day. And it was a step up from what I'd experienced at any of the other WFA events that I'd attended. We need to capture that, and we need to have the Festival of Power Chair Football. And that's what I want to try and capture in the road to Derby, and that's what I'd really like to build next year, the year after, try and take that next step.
I'm smiling because it won't be removed from the ambitions we have, and you've said some lovely stuff there about the strategy that we've put in place, 3-season strategy, and that's really important for us. One of the nice things that I think you've always said to me, Adam, because you didn't mention it there, but I'm going to say this because I think it's a lovely thing to hear, is you understand where we are in our journey as well. So this movement towards a more commercial offering to bring more people towards the sport, you said that really clearly, but you're happy to go with us on that journey, aren't you, which is great. So the trialling of things, it's, you know, got to be best foot forward, but ultimately you're happy to sit there and help us with that trialling and stuff to build something that works out actually what does work and what doesn't work on these future events. I, again, want to thank you for that, because not everyone would want to do that, but I think you fully respect where we are and where we're going as an organisation, which is fantastic.
Yeah, we're on a journey.
Yeah.
The strategy has an ambition, and we play our part in that ambition. And I'd like to see the cup being used to try things. You know, it won't always work. We are going to get some stuff wrong, and I am really relaxed about that, because it's all well-intentioned. It's all about trying to help the sport develop. And if we can take some of the learnings from the cup competition, and that helps promote the wider sport, some of the league fixtures, some of the international fixtures, but we can try it in the cup, I'm really relaxed about that. And then, because that's about us leaving some legacy.
Yeah.
And I hope we have a long association with you guys, and I hope we do this for a number of years. But we want to leave a legacy. So the time is to try it in the cup. And we will get some stuff wrong, and I'm so relaxed about that.
Yeah.
Because you can't grow and develop unless you challenge yourself to do something new. And if you challenge yourself to do something new, occasionally you fail. No problem. I'm really relaxed about that.
That's brilliant. I think that bit you just crept into conversation there about the road to Derby, I'm loving that. That feels like a hashtag.
That is a hashtag. That's what we want. It's the road to Derby.
So if we manage to really incentivise in terms of the noise that we create around that, I mean, just to be clear for everyone on that, that's the quarterfinal and semi-finals as it sits for this season. So, you know, we're talking about 8 teams that go for it in the cup competition, and that's that reward is to attend that Derby Arena, which we know is a very, very special venue.
Yep.
Quarterfinals played, draw is made by us, semi-final, bang, and we're all set for St George's Park in terms of the showpiece final. And just to touch on the next year from that season, the opportunity to look at Derby Arena perhaps as a venue again, but then use that perhaps as the final, does create further opportunity within our sport. So nothing that's completely designed yet, but we will do that in association with yourselves. But when we think about what that opens up, potentially that now opens up another trophy that is within our sport, possibly 2, just by holding a slightly different feel at St George's Park when they run their Disability Cup weekend, which is absolutely fantastic. So maybe that becomes, for example, the John Good Group WFA Cup winners play the league winners. Brilliant. And we're starting to already think about, for that season, perhaps introducing a shield earlier on in the cup competition as well. So again, nothing fully designed yet, but I love the way we're thinking and talking about this and collaborating, because for me, that just adds even more to the game in terms of one of our key core foundations within our sport is creating opportunity for the players. And by introducing that and potentially having 1, maybe even 2 extra trophies, brilliant.
Yeah, and I think our sport deserves a set piece if it can, and we can find a way to make that work. The Derby Arena feels like it needs a final. It's set up for that.
A lot of people said that.
And I'd echo that comment. It felt like it needed a final, and the day built, so it feels that way. And if we can, take clearly first and foremost the players, and then other stakeholders with us, and that we can, realise that ambition, I'd be delighted if that's where we can take. And that's one of the things we can test and trial. And then to have then the day at St George's is another thing and another step forward. And I love the idea that it could be cup versus league or something like that. That really appeals.
Yeah.
That's like our charity cup final. That makes a load of sense. And if we can achieve it, great. If we can't, we're still going to make Derby a great day. It just is.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think for people listening to this and watching this, I think for us to sit and talk about where our plans are, we're talking about things that make it even bigger and better and stronger. That's all good stuff. Can I just touch back on the St George's Park experience? So when you first sponsored it last season, you've talked about the atmosphere, and I'm bound to be a bit biased on this, but the atmosphere was incredible. It was electric. I think it was 900 people there as supporting. The teams are very well represented, but a lot of people outside of just supporting those two teams, that's when our community really comes together. I mean, I felt that tingle, because it just was electric. There were drums beat, the kits were on, bespoke T-shirts were on as well. Just looked amazing. And it's one of the things the FA do incredibly, incredibly well. And of course, you were part of the presentation panel. And that was my first experience. So you talked about me being relatively new. I'm about 14 months into the sport. So that was my first opportunity to be there representing TNT Sports live on TV. How was that experience for you?
Nerve-wracking is the honest answer to that. It's a strange role to play, if I'm being really honest. So there's a bit of you that feels incredibly rewarded on a personal note, and I often get that opportunity because of the role that I have. And you've got to respect that, because I'm representing John Good and all of the team in the business and what we've tried to achieve together in terms of the sponsorship. So there's one part of you that is incredibly grateful to have the opportunity, and that opportunity will happen only a handful of times in your entire lifetime if you're very fortunate. So first and foremost, just that they're going, wow, this is amazing. What a great thing to be able to be involved with. The next role is, you have an important role to play. So you've got to welcome the teams at the start, and you will meet all the players and the officials, and that's a lovely thing to be able to do, and welcome to the game and wish them all good luck. It's their set piece event. And then clearly at the end there was I was asked to present the trophy, and again, what a rewarding, brilliant experience to have. So you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh, these are just amazing life experiences, which you'll look back on and go, I was able to do that. And, even down to silly things. We have it recorded on our Sky at home, and my kids like watching it because there's Dad handing out a trophy.
There he is.
And they think this is normal, which is brilliant. And it really isn't. But there's a massive undertone through all of those things where you are acutely aware this is not your day in any way, shape or form. At all, in any way. You are a supporting role, and there's two things you need to do in that. So you're there to amplify the players and make sure, because it's their day, it's nothing to do with us ultimately. They're the elite athletes, we're just around the edges. And then there's the bit that you're always worrying about, is you just don't cock up. At any point, do not mess this up, right? So, you're welcoming the players, and there's different impairments. So you're nodding hands and you're shaking hands, and you're trying to make sure that that's right, because you're thinking about the players and you want them to have a good experience. And that happens, and then you can sit down and you relax, and then you're called up and you're presenting medals, and you're thinking, right, don't drop this, and then that player and this and that, and you've got to get that right, and then you've got to present a trophy. And all the way through that, the only thing in my head is, this is nothing to do with you, Adam. Just do not cock this up, right? Just get it right and make it about the players. You don't want to be the guy that everyone remembers dropped the cup. Just do not be that guy. So that was that's where the nerves came from.
Your kids might keep watching it, but for very different reasons. If you mess it up.
Oh well, very different. They'd love that. But so you have this mix of emotions on the day, and that is unusual, because it's not often that you have that excitement, privilege, worry, and knowing exactly where your role is. It's nothing to do with Adam on that day, despite the roles you're being asked to do, and they're important in themselves. It's about the players, and you just have to recognise that. And that created some anxiety, and I'm not a nervous type. You know me fairly well. I'm fairly confident in most situations. But yeah, there was a few nerves around that day, but amazing. I mean, what an experience.
I felt exactly the same as well. So I felt my first, as I've talked about, my first opportunity to be part of the presentation panel. It feels important, doesn't it? It feels really important. I often, the guys have heard me talk about this quite a lot. Doing things with painstaking excellence is really important. It's the start of a Martin Luther King quote. But it's really important to do that, because we are doing something that means an awful lot and is enabling an awful lot in terms of our sport. So I was equally nervous. Shall we just confess now and just say that a couple of days before that we were talking about what we're going to wear?
Yeah, we were. All the way down to what, are you wearing jeans or is it a chinos?
Exactly, exactly. So we were even nervous about the dress code.
Yeah, we were, yeah.
My goodness me. But no, it was brilliant to put you in that. It's quite interesting to hear, actually. We've not really spoken about that. But to put you in a position where you were part of that, I mean, that was genuinely something that I would always want to do, as you know, me as a character as well. But it's great to hear you talk like that, because I think it's quite nice to be nervous, because you want to do things really well.
Yep.
And you know you're doing something, back to my point, something really, really important. So that was great. And that will happen again this year.
Great. And hopefully this year I'll be a bit more relaxed. I'll probably therefore enjoy it a little bit more rather than worry about it. But that anxiety will still be there. Do not mess this up.
And we'll still check in to find out what each other are wearing before we get to that as well. What motivates you and your team at John Good Group to support Parachair football? Because, look, I mean, I'm aware of the setup within John Good Group and the Matthew Good Foundation as well. There's a lot that you do. There's an awful lot you do. There's therefore an awful lot of choice that you have in terms of where you bring your time, your effort, your resources, all of those things that go with that. So I think people would want to hear the answer to that question, because there's choice involved in everything you do and what you give. You help so many people.
I think there's a personal and a professional element to that.
Okay.
So on a personal note, I just love sport. I love competition at an elite level. The appreciation is just off the charts for what any sportsman does at the top level.
Yeah.
So I'm deeply passionate about that, full stop. And it doesn't matter what the sport is, I can very quickly buy into what sport is about. And that's because sport is an amazing enabler. It's great for your mental health, it's great for teamwork, it's great for building great habits. It just, in my life, sport has helped me so much and has built so many characteristics and habits in me that has enabled me to do the things I do. You will not find a bigger fan of just sport in more general. So there's instantly, it resonated, right? What we're doing, how does it work, all that stuff, loved it. So I can get there straight away on that because I understand the benefit of it. You then come to the professional side, which is where John Good and the Matthew Good Foundation sit in. So I think there's maybe a couple of different elements in that. So from a John Good perspective, we have a real ambition to help organisations develop and grow. So one of our big strategic objectives is always about growth organisations, helping people on their journey, whether that be through pro bono work, through investment, whatever, help people on a growth journey. And what resonated there was your story and what you were trying to build, and when I sat and chatted to the guys in the team that help keep the organisation going, they were all absolutely eager for this transformational piece. Let's take this a step forward. They were all hungry to do it. So that aligned really closely with John Good. And then John Good, either directly or through the Matthew Good Foundation, has a huge objective and a real mindset about making genuine social impact. And if we take the Matthew Good Foundation, for example, they're super focused, laser targeted on helping the smallest charities go on their own growth journeys. That's the whole purpose of that. And we only look to really fund and support with grants and other work that the foundation does with the smallest of those charities, because they're super targeted, they're very community focused, they tend to be specialists in an area, and the impact they make is amazing. They just haven't had the opportunity to do the growth piece yet. So I think that resonated with what you guys were trying to do, probably on a different scale, to be fair, than some of the charities we operate in. But that ethos of getting involved on the ground floor if we can, and deploying the skills and the talents to go on a journey together just appealed absolutely everywhere we can. So whether it was personal, professional, or through the social impact, it just aligned really, really well. And it was one of those, not all three of those boxes are always ticked. So you said we have choices. We have loads of choices.
Of course you do.
We get approached probably every day in a different way about grants, about pro bono work, about whatever. And we have to make choices. And not that there is an official tick list anywhere, but some of those don't go through all of those ticks. But this one did, and it sailed through. And it became, I don't quite like the phrase, but it became a no-brainer. It was one of those ones where it was just like, this is something that we're going to do because it just works every single place. So, yeah, and that's really why I could get excited about it. And I've gone through my career often on a lot of gut calls about things, but that means I've trained my gut to make good calls. Yeah. And that doesn't mean it's always been perfect either. But and this was just straight away. This is something we're going to do. This just works. And so far, I think I've been proven right on that. And my instincts tell me that if we can, get a good plan together, make sure the two teams are working together well and we're aligned, that we're going to be able to execute, what I described earlier, which is the road to Derby and the growth through the next couple of years.
And there's a danger that I say this too much, but surely never. We have this conversation, don't we, via WhatsApp quite often about, have I thanked you enough? And you always respond saying, yeah, I think you might have done, Dean, but I'll keep saying it. I'll never get tired of saying that. It's a huge thank you for what you're doing. Just want to go back to something you said about your interest in sport, because I think that in itself is quite interesting when you talked about, you use the phrase, which often comes up, mental health. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the huge things about our sport. So we know, again, back to painstaking excellence, we know what it's helping. Mm-hmm. So some people, not all, that play our game are elite athletes. A lot of them are very reliant on carers and parents and support. Mm-hmm. And when you're in that chair, you've got independence, haven't you? Mm-hmm. So you're having to make your own decisions from a leadership, collaboration, teamwork perspective, all those things that go with it. We must never misunderstand that's what we're enabling as well. That independence is critically important, and I think that links to things like mental health. Very fortunate position as a custodian of the Wheelchair Football Association to sit there and receive lots of unsolicited emails and messages around what it's doing for son and daughters of people that are playing our sport. Mm-hmm. And often that's connected with the mental health aspects. It's that bit that brings in that independence. Mm-hmm. So I think that's quite interesting, because I've put you back to that because it's what you said earlier on about what you personally have enjoyed with sport. I think I've always felt that since I've been there, it's very pronounced in the game that we're playing as well, just because there isn't that independence for a lot of our athletes in their day-to-day lives. Mm-hmm. On court, playing that game, that all fits perfectly for them. Yeah,
and I grew up playing rugby, football, and the camaraderie, the teamwork, the occasional niggles, all of those things that happen in teams in a dynamic environment, and it's not pre-scripted or planned, and you've got to react in the moment.
Yeah,
they are things that help you be free, and they give you a purpose, and you're able to demonstrate your skill set in a way that is you, and by playing your part in the team, you're able to commit to something that is far greater than just yourself. And anybody that's had the opportunity to play team sports will recognise some of that. And if we can help through sponsorship, through you guys organising the leagues and the cup competitions, give the players the ability to have that chance where they might not have it in their other sort of parts of their lives, that's amazing. Sport has, without a shadow of a doubt, helped me through my life deal with harder periods of time, whether that be pressure, stress, making mistakes, bad career choices, which you'll know a few about. And it's taken me back to something where I can focus, I can deliver, I can take enjoyment from it for what it is in itself. And at the end of that 90 minutes or 80 minutes when we're playing rugby, you can have a laugh with your friends, you can take the mick out of each other, you laugh at the stuff you got wrong, and it can all be there. And every other life worry just does not come into your mind in that period of time. And if we can deliver that for people, that's enough in itself.
Often said but true, isn't it, about sport? And I would argue, again, with my bias head on, football in particular does amazing things. It enables an awful lot of things that's not necessarily just about playing the game. Mm-hmm. And we really feel that where we are at WFA as well. This is an interesting one, because you've talked about your first season experience with us. Are there any absolute standout memorable moments from your time with us so far that you just think it could be anything, funny, that was interesting, that was actually quite heart-wrenching? Is there anything that you can relay to that you think those were big moments, significant moments?
My standout moment, ironically, has not been to do with the cup. It was the welcome in Nottingham.
Okay, nice, which you touched on.
That bit for me did everything, told me everything about this sport and the spectators and what it meant to the players and how the families help and enable the players to go and do what they do. That for me will always be a standout moment, because it spoke to the values of the community that we were becoming part of, albeit from a sponsorship perspective only. There is lots of other highlights. the Derby Arena Day will always be a memory because it was really the first time that the John Good thing got really behind it in the sport. Being in one of the chairs will be a memory. Watching my girls go into the chairs, so they understood it. They still talk about that. I think that for me will be a bit of a takeaway.
Yeah.
And then the atmosphere at the final. It felt electric, a proper cup final feeling. We've got to capture that. We've got to bottle that, and we've got to spread that into the rest of the cup as and where we can.
And I guess that's your point, isn't it, about how we look to evolve something like Derby Arena. We trialled things like, for the last season for the WFA Cup, we trialled the bleacher seating. Mm-hmm. So having an opportunity to bring more fans towards it creates that atmosphere, and there won't be one player that you talk to that doesn't want that. Mm-hmm. You know, that absolutely is something they will thrive off. And whether you were playing in St George's Park on that final or not, the people that were there that play our game, our elite athletes that were sitting there watching that, whether that be in person or on the TV, I've watched it back, mm-hmm. I've recorded it as mm-hmm. well. The atmosphere came across brilliantly on the TV as well, didn't it? But that's what we want, isn't it? We want, the players will want that noise, but of course we're back to one of those same massive objectives, is to raise the profile of the sport and get more people watching it and viewing it as well. That's
I'm a firm believer. We get more people watching it, we'll then find more people wanting to get involved in the sport. And then that creates more players and more teams, and that builds that out. I think that will happen. That's not a short-term thing, but that will start to happen with greater awareness. And if we're able to grow the wider network of the sport and the participation both in players in terms of spectators, that will help strengthen the commercial proposition, which brings more money into the sport, which means you can do more of the things that we're talking about, and it's a really positive cycle. That's what I think we're starting to try and help you guys build. That's what my ambition is, to use the Cup during the period that we're involved, to use that to help test some of those things, so that going forwards, the WFA team has a really good understanding of what works, what doesn't work, and how you can start to achieve some of those things that are going to enable the growth of the sport.
Yeah.
And when we get that stuff right, and as I say, my gut says we're going to get that stuff right over the next couple of years, we're going to see some steps forward, I think, then quite quick. More teams, more players, more supporters, wider networks, and then it all compounds. That's where we've got to get to.
Almost as if we're very aligned on this, Adam.
Well, we are. Yeah.
Right. So let's just touch back, Adam, on your sporting, the fact that you love sport, you love what it does. And I know that, I'm going to say painfully, but when I asked you this earlier on, the car on the drive up, you were saying that it was a great experience, but you love your cycling. And you've just done something that's pretty awesome and actually has inspired me a little bit. And I can't believe I'm saying this on camera because it is going to hold me accountable.
Okay.
But we'll get to that bit in terms of how it's inspired me to run a challenge. It's associated with what we're doing from a WFA Cup perspective as well. But first of all, tell people about what you've recently done for charity, because I think it's an incredible, awesome achievement.
So for the last couple of years, I've been getting into more endurance cycling. I found it a real positive thing for me physically, getting out and about, stresses of the work and all the stuff that we've talked about today. So for the last couple of years, we've decided and undertaken a ride from the Severn Bridge. And then we've ridden all the way to the Humber Bridge. So last year we did it in a single day. So that was a 212-mile bike ride in one day. And I did that solo last year. And by some fortune, I suppose, there was a few other people that said, oh, well, I'm definitely going to do that with you next year. So we very recently completed the ride again. I was incredibly lucky to have 7 other riders with me this year. And so we undertook the same challenge, and we set off with the Severn Bridge because of some of the mixed ability within that group in terms of cycling experience. We decided to do it over the 2 days instead of the one. So day one was 115 miles and the second day was 97 miles. But the 8 of us undertook it again, and we set off on a Saturday morning, and we arrived back into Hesel, where our office is, on the Sunday evening, and all 8 of them did every single yard of the 212 miles was completed by all 8 riders.
Wow.
So I find cycling an incredible way to bring people together, especially with mixed ability, because you can just get under at your own pace. and we were able to raise quite a lot of money for a local charity as well. So, incredibly rewarding, and if it inspires other people to get on the bike, then amazing. And it sounds like that's what you're thinking.
And it has, but I'm really reluctant to say this now because it's going to hold me fully to account. So just to complete the picture on that, so again, cycling event, 200 miles. We want to coincide something for raising funds within the Wheelchair Football Association. I'm going to call this the start of what I hope will become a benevolent fund. So something that safeguards our sport going forward. And, I think regardless of the significance about what this event might raise, benevolent fund for me is a building of a fund, perhaps for future years, to help with that sustainability, help with hardship potentially for clubs. But it wouldn't be an immediate thing. The fund needs to build first and foremost. So I'm absolutely wedded to that as part of what I would call one of our WIGs, wildly important goals, that sits alongside the strategy, which probably makes sense. But I want to be part of that and pushing myself. Now, I've got a sporting background myself, but actually for a number of years, not really been tackling any sporting events at all of any significant nature. So 200 miles on a bike is going to test me. A very good friend of the Wheelchair Football Association, Nick Woodward, is an avid cyclist. So he has done so many extreme routes himself. He has decided to help me put this together. And when I say help me put it together, I'm in his hands. He tells me what's a really, really good idea. So the two of us have come up with this plan, and actually we used the strap line earlier on of the road to Derby. Where I see this happening is perhaps starting off on, because I'll never be able to do it in a day. I'm not a pro like you, Adam, but actually perhaps starting off on the 9th and then across the 10th of May, we actually end up going into the Derby Arena for the quarter-final and semi-final day, having completed that 200 miles.
Brilliant.
And to do that, I've got a favour to ask you, because I think we can play with this a bit. So the road to Derby, the good road to Derby, because my plan and our plan and what Nick's put in front of me is to actually start the process by setting off outside your premises, the John Good Group. And I think there's a lovely route that we've worked out. When I say lovely, he says
it looks good on paper.
It does. Yeah, I'm not sure about the hills and that kind of stuff, the inclines.
So where are you headed first?
So I think from there, we will end up, if I've got this right, we'll end up going to another sponsor that we have, which is Optegra, who sponsor our National League. Hopefully, they don't know this yet, but going to their premises in Manchester. We have a very good partnership with UA92, which is owned by the class of 92. So I'm hoping we take that in as well. Then we want to go to St George's Park. And then if I've worked that out correctly, we will then finish at Derby Arena. So I hope that's going to really test me. I'm going to be a mess when I get into Derby Arena, so don't expect too much of me on that day, is what I could say from a quarter-final, semi-final perspective. But the more I've talked about this, the more I think it's absolutely something, it's certainly something I want to do. It is going to push me, it's going to test me. And I think the opportunity is for us to open that up to other people. So we'll get planning on that. It's very early stages at the moment in terms of doing it, although I've only got 6 months to train. That clock is ticking.
You'll be fine.
I love your optimism. I love your optimism on that. But I think from that side of it, we also want to encourage participation from other people. And part of that will be our athletes as well. So again, I'd like to scope out on some of those particular milestones that we hit along that route, whether we can actually accommodate that as well. The answer to that will be yes. We just need to get our head around how we work that. But that's the grand plan.
What a great challenge. And bringing in all those key stakeholders into that route is really lovely. That's a really nice way to highlight those key stakeholders, to do something positive for the sustainability of the sport. And physical challenges are positive, right? Because you've got to dedicate yourself to it now for 6 months.
Of course, and now everyone knows. As soon
as
this
You're
goes
on the
out.
hook now, right?
So unless they edit this and it's not included, but certainly on the hook. But it'll be my pleasure to do it. Adam, are there any questions you've got from me in terms of representing the Wheelchair Football Association, being the chairperson of it, and therefore a trustee as well? Anything you think you should ask us?
I think you've set out a lot of the sort of questions that I would typically ask you in your strategy document, if I'm being really honest with you, because the work that went into that by the team and you top and tailing it and making sure strategically and direction-wise worked underlines really what you need to know about the sport moving forwards. I suppose, though, if I was to ask you one question, that's a 3-year view.
Yeah.
Give me a 10-year view. Just high level, though, 10 years, crystal ball gazing, what would you love to see the sport look like a decade from now?
That's a brilliant question, isn't it? I think for me, just to go back a step, the reason we did a free season, we even changed the language. So it wasn't, you'll notice it's quite subtle.
True, 3 seasons, not
3 years,
yeah.
3 seasons. And the reason we did that is because we wanted accountability as a group of trustees, which I think is a lovely touch. So nobody needed convincing on that at all. It's probably a method that I introduced them to talk about accountability and say, look, if we're going to go out and say this is what the sport will look like in 3 seasons' time, we owe that painstaking excellence. We owe that to our athletes, our elite athletes. However, the reality is it will hold us to account. You can't then say, well, that was misread, that line, because as you've seen, I'm sure you'd agree, Adam, it's very clear what that strategy is actually suggesting we will get to in 3 seasons' time. That's a brilliant question about the future of that. I mentioned a little bit earlier on that we talked about wildly important goals, and I think that's the bit I'd frame on this. So whether that's on court, so the playing of the game, or outside of that, I think that's important to split the two things. So on the court, in my time there, beyond my time there, having set the motion in place, whatever that looks like going forward, the reality is I'd love us to host a major tournament. Now, that's not going to be purely dependent on what we decide we can do. We will need a lot of help from that. The FA will be instrumental in that as well. But the actual idea of hosting a European Nations Cup, European Championship, maybe potentially even something like Champions League, which one of our English teams has won for the first time, as recent as last June over in Paris. I must name the club, that's Aspire. Or whether that's a World Cup going forward. We know the 26th World Cup's going to be in Buenos Aires, but the next one after that, the one after that, whenever it is, that has to be an ambition for our sport. So when we talk about things like showcasing, that's really important. Yeah. We are, again, they won't like me for not saying this, so I would definitely need to say this, England are the reigning Nations Cup holders, so that's equivalent to the European Championship. So next year, we run that again. I would say hosting a tournament is one thing. These don't have to be natural bedfellows, but winning another major tournament should be on our agenda from that side of it. And then I think outside of that, we've talked about things like safeguarding the sport, used the word legacy earlier on, love that word. I think for us, it's trying to think about a benevolent fund, as I touched on, and the starting point of that is this crazy challenge that I've decided to put myself into. But the reality of that is that's the start of that process. So whatever happens, if we get stronger commercially, that's great. But we also have stuff that we're doing that we are focused on that helps with that sustainability of it. That's really, really important. And then you've got the other bits like things like bespoke facility. I would love us to have something to think about our conversation about St George's Park. That is a futsal arena, and effectively it's about as bespoke as you can get with the seating that exists on the side of it. I talked about pretty much that capacity was full, about circa 200 people. Wouldn't that be amazing to have something where we're not just, there's nothing wrong with this, it's not a criticism, but we're not just finding basketball or netball courts.
Yeah, there's a home.
Exactly. So that's probably quite a lot. I've now put myself under immense pressure, but I think it probably does ask the question about where I see it going. The sport will naturally evolve in terms of whatever that looks like. I think for us, our responsibility sits with, if we're going to say we've got elite athletes and we've got these brilliant pathways that are set up, we should challenge ourselves and say that feed into the England elite national side. And our relationship with the FA, that's important. So hosting tournaments, winning tournaments, it's got to be what we're creating there. In time, our National League, which all fits together with this, would we develop other tiers to that? Potentially. I wouldn't go out and say we're definitely going to do that at this stage because there's a lot that needs to be considered around that. But the growth of our game clearly is important. But out of the 4 things that I've mentioned, I think they're huge things that are wildly important goals that will take a lot of consideration, a little bit of time, an awful lot of blood, sweat and tears going into it as well. But we're back to that statement I made, painstaking excellence. Does that answer your question?
It does. Brilliant. An exciting future ahead.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And Adam, listen, just to sit down and speak to you about this stuff as to why you are willing to show the generosity and the support, and more than that, we didn't really touch on this, but when you've been at these events as well, you've come with colleagues, and you can see, you mentioned about how it was a bit of a no-brainer, was your term, in terms of how people have talked about, yes, this is something like we'd like to support. When they're there, your colleagues, just wanting to know more and throw themselves into it. Love that side of it. So again, in danger of it saying far too much, but it's a huge thank you from me because it's going to enable so much. It already is, and it helps us improve consistently what we're putting on. And that's a huge thank you, because that makes the world of difference to us in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.